exclusive interview with Kyiv's mayor. And with all eyes on Russia and Ukraine, North Korea's Kim Jong-un just tested a missile that could reach the United States.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome to The Lead. I'm Pamela Brown in for Jake Tapper, and we begin with breaking news out of Brussels, where the president is rallying world leaders at an emergency summit discussing new ways to punish Russia for its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. President Biden insists NATO has never been stronger, despite the Russian president's intentions.
Putin was banking on NATO being split. My early conversation with him in December and early January, it was clear to me he didn't think we could sustain this cohesion. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine.
President Biden also promised to respond if Putin were to use chemical weapons in Ukraine. And he said it's time for the G20 to show Russia the door. Let's get right to our CNN team on the ground in Brussels. Nick Robertson and Caitlin Collins joins us live. Caitlin, let's start with you. This is the first time President Biden has come out and said he wants Russia out of the G20. How significant is that?
It's probably the biggest news to come out of his press conference, Pamela, where President Biden said, yes, he does agree with a statement that the Australian Prime Minister has made, which is they don't believe Russia deserves a spot in the G20. Of course, as you know, the G20 is the summit of leading economies across the globe. It's not something that's just made up of democracies, though we should note. China is a member of the G20. Saudi Arabia is a member of the G20. But given, of course, this bloody invasion that has happened, where obviously civilians have died and had to flee their country by the thousands and millions, this is a stance that President Biden took today, saying he does not believe Russia should be able to participate in the G20. They have a summit every year. This year it's in Indonesia. But President Biden said if Russia is still invited to that summit, that he thinks the counterbalance to that should be inviting Ukraine and having them come. Now, whether or not that actually happens, it remains to be seen. This wouldn't be completely foreign to Russia if they were kicked out of the G20. They were kicked out of the G8, remember, after what happened in 2014 with their illegal annexation of Crimea. It became the G7, which is the group of leaders that also met today to talk about this invasion. But certainly significant for the President of the United States to come out and say he does not believe Russia deserves to participate in that forum with those other world leaders at this point.
And Nick, he made it clear that the decision isn't just up to him, right? The other G20 countries have to go along with that. How likely are those other countries to go along with removing Russia from the alliance?
Yeah, well, despite the warning to China today not to give economic or military support to Russia, we've heard from the Chinese saying that they don't think Ukraine is a suitable topic and the sort of humanitarian military situation in Ukraine is a suitable topic for the G20. So they're already signaling there that they don't see an objection to having Russia there at the moment. They've been backing Russia essentially at the United Nations Security Council on key votes there. I think the Saudis are an interesting one. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia has a very close relationship with President Putin. The Saudis have been very slow. You could almost say that they have been have decided not to ramp up oil production at the speed President Biden and other leaders would like to see them to do to make up for the shortfall of oil and gas supplies that could be a result of any cut in supplies that Russia inflicts on the European Union and other nations. So it's quite possible the Saudis would not stand with President Biden on that one. And I'm thinking as well here the Argentinians. Alberto Fernandez, one of the recent presidents to go visit President Putin in Russia just a couple of weeks before the war began. He actually got a hug from President Putin. So I don't think we'll see the Argentinians as well backing that vote. But the Europeans, we can expect the British and French, Germans to be quite strong about whether or not Russia should be in or out of the G20.
All right, Caitlin, I'm going to bring you back in because President Biden said that the U.S. will respond if Putin uses biological or chemical or nuclear weapons. Do we have any idea what that response would be?
No, that is something he did not detail or really get into. He did say it would kind of depend on the severity of a chemical weapons attack. Pam, we know that's the number one concern that the White House has right now. It's certainly one of the highest ones, if not the number one, because they are concerned that Putin is preparing to do so. They've been saying that he is laying the groundwork to conduct a chemical weapons attack. And it obviously raises the question of not just how the United States would respond, but how NATO would respond to this attack. Would they view it as something that crosses that line and does make them change their stance on military involvement in Ukraine? That is something the president has said isn't going to happen. You're not going to see U.S. forces going into Ukraine. Whether or not this changes that calculus, he also didn't say today. He said it would basically be a response in accordance with the severity of that attack. And so that remains to be seen. One other thing that the leaders wrestled with behind closed doors today, Pam, is whether or not he does conduct some kind of biological attack, a radioactive attack, and that affects a NATO country nearby. Obviously, a lot of them share a border with Ukraine. Would they consider that an attack on a NATO ally? Because obviously the president has said they would defend every inch of NATO territory. That is quite specific for the president of the United States to say that. And so I think this raises so many questions that you have not seen these leaders have to grapple with in a way that we saw today in this extraordinary session where they had these very abruptly scheduled meetings of world leaders, something, Pam, that normally takes months to organize. They put it together within days, and you saw, of course, this and the concern about a chemical weapons attack was a major factor in their conversations.
Yeah, you really can sense the urgency there for good reason. And also, Nick, NATO says it plans to reinforce its own chemical, biological, and nuclear defense systems. What does that entail?
Well, they've talked about supplying Ukraine with the wherewithal to detect and mitigate in terms of in medical environment. That would be supply medicines suitable for treating chemical weapons. The concern, it does exist, certainly in the European Union. I was speaking with the Greek Prime Minister today, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, about his concerns about the chemical, biological, nuclear threat that's coming from Russia right now. He feels there's an element of saber rattling coming, but it's something that he says he cannot even begin to countenance, that if those sorts of weapons were being used. We don't have details on precisely what NATO would do, but we do understand that it would be proportionate and would be dependent on what Russia does, how it uses it, where it uses it, and the impact very likely, if there was, across the border into NATO countries.
All right, Nick Robertson. Caitlin Collins reporting live in Brussels. Thank you. And let's discuss now with our panel, retired Air Force General and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Philip Breedlove. I want to start with you on the heels of what we just heard there from Nick and Caitlin. President Biden promised today to respond if Russia deploys chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons on Ukraine. He wouldn't say exactly what that would be, but what do you think? What should NATO's response be if that happens?
Well, thanks for having me. And what we've heard, not only from the president today, but from Congress yesterday, were words like a more forceful response. And so I think what we've left Mr. Putin wondering is this that tripwire that would bring more direct involvement of NATO troops, but it wasn't described in public. So that is left for him to worry about.
Susan Glasser, there is a huge focus this week on the threat of Russia using weapons of mass destruction against Ukraine or NATO. And also, like what Caitlin pointed out, the possibility if Russia were to use chemical weapons in Ukraine and some of it made its way over into a NATO ally, into Poland on the border there. Should that possibility be keeping us up at night?
Look, absolutely. This isn't even an academic conversation. Remember that Russia has done this before. Russia has used polonium, a radioactive substance, to carry out a hit job in the United Kingdom. Did it again with a former spy, Sergei Skripal. It has supported its partner and ally, the Assad regime in Syria, through multiple use of chemical weapons against their own people. And so, this is something that is in, unfortunately, the playbook of Vladimir Putin and the Russian military. So I think it is a very real, unfortunately, possibility. And I also think we should calculate the enormous political pressure that will be brought to bear on President Biden and on European leaders if there is something like a horrific chemical weapons attack inside Ukraine. Already, populations are clamoring to do more to support the Ukrainians. And I think that the volume would be dialed up so intensely. It would be very hard for them not to take some sort of military action in response.
Yeah, I think that that's really important context there. Gloria Borger, to bring you in, President Biden kept stressing the unity of NATO today. That clearly was a big theme for him, big through line with this trip. The Financial Times has an op-ed today from its chief columnist, and let's listen to this. It says, quote, "America risks being seduced by its own public relations. The world's reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine is far more complex than that. Since February 24th, the West has been galvanized into showing more unity than it has in years. Yet most of the world is on the sidelines waiting to see which way it goes. Not for the first time, the West is mistaking its own unity for a global consensus." So what do you think? Is President Biden misreading the room or the world? What's your reaction?
First of all, it's kind of remarkable that there is even NATO unity in the first place. And I think given the invasion of Ukraine, NATO looked at what was going on. And I think, administration sources that I've spoken with were kind of stunned a little bit at the alacrity of NATO saying, look, yeah, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. So NATO is unified, and that came about because of Ukraine. They're completely aware of China's issues. They're completely aware of India's issues. I mean, these are state leaders. They know what's going on in the world. But this is about values of our nation and their nations, and this is about history. And I think they also understand that as well. And President Biden has made it clear that he understands those other nations. For example, he said today, well, maybe Indonesia is not going to want Russia to be excommunicated from the G20. So it's not as if President Biden doesn't understand this. It's just that they are doing what they believe they have to do as leaders of nations who have values.
General Breedlove, to bring you back in. This week, CNN reported that an official with the supreme headquarters of the Allied powers of Europe said Putin's war in Ukraine has put the NATO alliance and its member nations absolutely at risk. You also have, though, President Biden saying NATO is as strong as ever. How does that square?
Well, clearly there is a risk, and we've talked about it today. If one of these chemical attacks or something went across a border, now we have an issue. But what I think what the good news is we are now more ready than we've ever been. We've readied some of the NRF, some of our NATO response force. We have battle groups forward now we didn't have before, and we're building 4 more battle groups forward. And the United States has moved additional troops to Europe. So there is risk, but the good news is we are getting ready for that risk.
Susan, quickly, President Biden got a little testy today when he was asked about why sanctions haven't been a deterrent. What did you make of his answer to that and the pushback he gave, saying that was never the intent?
Look, when you impose sanctions after the war has already begun, I do think there's an enormous effort to go ahead and essentially try to shut the Russian economy down, the military-industrial complex. But that's going to take time. That may have an impact on the war, but not a short-term impact. The tragedy is that the war began. There were sanctions that could have been ratcheted up over the years since 2014. But a final point to remind you that we had a president of the United States before Joe Biden who contemplated lifting sanctions at one point, who wanted Russia not only to be part of the G20, but to rejoin the G7 as recently as the summer of 2020. He was proposing that. So obviously, there was a lot of steps along the way to this tragedy unfolding.
What did you think of that moment, Gloria, when he got a little touchy there?
Well, we've seen Joe Biden get touchy before. And I think, look, this has been a political issue. When do you invoke sanctions and when do they start to work and how long should they last? And, there were some saying you should have done it sooner and some saying you did it at the right time. And he clearly is thinking and believing, as do other NATO leaders, that they did it at the right time. And as we like to say in politics, only time will tell. And so he is a little touchy about it because people are saying, well, if you had done that sooner, perhaps Russia wouldn't have behaved the way it did. And that is not his playbook.
All right. Thank you all so much. Well, coming up, an exclusive interview with the man in charge of running Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital that is believed to be Putin's top target. Plus, how Ukraine is fighting back in the southern part of the country where Russian warships docked in one port.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
In a special ongoing season of the Tug of War podcast, CNN reporters are on the ground in Ukraine, documenting Russia's invasion, the escalating conflict, and what it means for the rest of the world. Tug of War. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
So great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest.
I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them?
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move, very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the scene that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest.
We continue to monitor the government in crisis.
This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed. That's what it's all about.
Max Foster, CNN.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy. And so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the U.S. forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
Today marks 1 month into Vladimir Putin's deadly, unprovoked invasion. And as Russian forces apply pressure, Ukrainians are fighting back, pushing Putin's army more than 30 miles away from the capital city, according to a U.S. defense official. And then there's this dramatic images like this, backing up the Ukrainian Navy's claim it destroyed a Russian ship loaded with military equipment. We're going to take you live to that region ahead, but first, a CNN exclusive. CNN's Fred Pleitgen caught up with the mayor of Ukraine's capital city and his celebrity brother. The two had a specific request of President Biden and NATO allies, and they also had choice words for Vladimir Putin and his war that the UN now estimates has killed more than 1,000 civilians. Watch.
As Vladimir Putin continues his assault on Ukraine, the U.S. believes taking the capital, Kyiv, remains Russia's main goal. But the city's mayor, former world boxing champ Vitaly Klitschko, vows Putin's troops will not enter this town. We met the mayor and his brother Vladimir Klitschko, himself a former boxing champion, in a secret location in Kyiv.
Do you think that you have what it takes to fend them off completely and that this city will not be taken by Russia?
It's our hometown. We fight. We never go to the knee. We don't want to be slaves. We don't want back to USSR to live in dictator, to live in authoritarianism. We see our country as modern, European, democratic country.
The Klitschkos are on the move 24/7, visiting residential areas shelled by the Russian army, sometimes getting emotional when seeing the aftermath of Russian attacks.
Putin says he's only targeting military targets.
Bullshit. Sorry. Where is military target?
Comforting those affected by the war and overseeing the effort to train those looking to confront Russian forces.
You've really stepped up and really have organized the defense of the city. How did you manage to do that, learn that so quickly, learning on the fly?
We don't need to organize. I meet people in blog post with very peaceful profession. Artist, musician, doctors, never ever have idea to take the uniform and take the weapons in the hand. But right now, they in the street and ready to fight. A few days ago, the apartment building destroyed from rocket. One man, around 60 years old, coming to me and ask what I have to doing. What I have to do right now. I give him proposal to evacuate him to my safety zone, to west of Ukraine. He told, Mr. Klitschko, my mayor, I don't want to leave from my hometown. Please, give me weapons. I am ready to defend my family, my lovely Kyiv. Instead the panic, instead demoralization, the people motivate so much and have spirit to defend our future.
But they're up against a strong and better equipped foe. As President Biden visits Europe to meet NATO allies, the Klitschko's message is get tougher on Putin.
What are your demands? What do you guys need to continue this fight?
Our will is strong, and it's better and stronger than any army and any weapon. But we definitely need to close our sky. Our civilians and our cities are getting destroyed, and it's continuing while we're giving this interview and speaking about it. The fights are still going on. We need supply of the defensive weapons. And you guys just need to stop any economical relationship with Russia. This way, we will isolate him, make him weaker, and just show that international law cannot be broken. Oil. Obviously, the world needs oil and gas, but it's better to pay higher price than to pay with lives for that oil.
And so you guys obviously, or you want a no-fly zone, I gather, and aircraft, anti-aircraft systems and the like to beat the Russians in the sky, right?
Us with defensive weapons, close the skies are own. We have enough men and women that are going to stand for the country and will defend it as strong, as much as possible. And we're going to close the sky on our own. We just need the defensive equipment for that.
Vitaly Klitschko knows Joe Biden well. The two met both in Washington, D.C. and in Kiev when Biden was vice president and the U.S. frontman for Ukraine policy in the Obama administration. What's your message to Joe Biden as he comes to Europe?
Stay with Ukraine. Thank you very much for support. Support Ukraine. With our friends, we are much stronger. It's our future. It's our freedom. We're ready to fight for that, but we need support for the whole democratic world.
The Klitschkos are international celebrities with massive fan bases in both the U.S. and in Europe. And yet they say for them there is no other place they want to be than in Kiev, despite the dangers. You're some of the prime targets for the Russians. You know, they're out to get you. Why do you do it? Or what motivates you?
It's our homeland. It's our parents here. We grown up. It's our country. It's our home. And the simple answer, we have to be here.
Do you know this expression of roots? Our roots are here. Our father, that was one of the Chernobyl survivors, and he was one of the liquidators that buried in Kiev, and he's Ukrainian as it could be. Our relatives, our friends, every single street reminds us on some memories in life. And that's something that gives you so much strength, because the truth is on our side. This is pretty much reminds me like in a fairy tale, the fight between the good and the evil.
So there you hear it very clear, the two Klitschko brothers vowing to stay in the fight and that they aren't going anywhere. And, you know, one of the senses or the sense that we got here is the two are extremely motivated and certainly also bolstered by the fact that right now the Ukrainian military does seem to be making some gains, especially around here, around the Kiev area. In fact, as I'm speaking to you right now, Pamela, we are once again hearing what appears to be outgoing artillery as that battle continues to go on. And of course, Ukrainian forces have been saying that at least in some areas around here, they have managed to push the Russians back, and they vow to continue to do that, Pamela.
Brad Plykin, what an interview that was. Thank you for bringing that to us. And now we want to go to Ukraine's southeast region for what may be a small victory for the Ukrainian military. Not only does the Ukraine Navy claim to have destroyed a major Russian warship, but it also took out 2 other Russian vessels. CNN's Ivan Watson is in that region just north of the Ukrainian port. Hi, Ivan. So Russia once touted this as the first ship docked at that port. Now this attack. How crippling might this be to Russian naval resources?
Well, it's certainly got to be an embarrassing setback. And we do know, because the port of Berdyansk is occupied by Russian forces, there's an awful lot of social media video that has come out, long, unedited sequences that show just this terrible fire burning in the port, consuming the bow of a large Russian warship, and then seeing at least two other warships moving as quickly as they can to try to leave the port that they were tied up against right next to this ship, and those ships themselves were burning as well. And part of what is so dramatic about this is just a couple of days ago, Russian state television, several channels, had different reporters on the bow of this Russian warship called the Orsk, which is kind of a marine cargo ship. It can bring in, according to one of those reporters, dozens of tanks, around 20 tanks or 40 armored personnel carriers. They may have actually alerted the Ukrainians to the location of this warship, which was then pummeled by some kind of Ukrainian weapon with catastrophic results. A Ukrainian official in charge of the Customs Border Service kind of made a joke about this on Facebook, saying that, hey, that Russian state TV reporter is the best Russian propagandist for us, his favorite. Back to you.
And we've seen some of the worst of this invasion there in Ukraine's southeast region. Parts of Mariupol, just south of you, were reduced to rubble. We've seen those images coming in. Yet so many people try to stay. Is there still an organized effort to get people out if they want to leave?
there are still efforts, and they're halting. There are efforts to try to get buses to transport people out, and those have been stopped on various days. The Ukrainian government accusing the Russian military of kidnapping the emergency workers who were trying to take those buses to Mariupol. Meanwhile, the defenders inside, they are facing a very dire situation. They are surrounded by far more Russian troops than they have. They concede that, but they say they are going to fight. Take a listen.
It's urban combat. So yeah, that's the street to street, building to building. The enemy trying to block us in the city blocks. We're pushing them back. The enemy have a very, very serious casualties. We're not counting them anymore. We need the heavy anti-air systems first. We need aircraft second. We need artillery pieces, and we need anti-tank guided missiles.
The fact of the matter, this is a modern-day siege. The battleground is a city, or what's left of it, and we just don't know how many civilians are trapped in the middle of this terrible battle. Pamela.
All right, Ivan Watson, keep up the excellent reporting there. Thank you. Coming up, while the world is focused on Ukraine, the North Koreans just tested something that they have not tried since 2017.
There were those who said it was a dream. And yet independence made the dream come true. Today, in the biggest delta on Earth, one of the fastest growing GDPs is a reality. Because here, medicine, food, and garments for the world are made. For the year of the Golden Jubilee celebration of independence, the dream has never been more real. Because dreams are made in Bangladesh.
This is the screen where it happens. The moments that can change the world.
These are the faces we see, the voices we empower. This is the work that continues, who we are today and what we can become.
This is journalism that reflects the world we live in.
I'm Becky Anderson, 200 meters above the city of Dubai. This is CNN.
Whether you live in a big house or a small apartment, you can grow at least some of your own food. And not only will the food be fresh and nutritious, but studies show gardening has mental health benefits too. If you've got a windowsill or just a sunny corner, you can grow herbs year-round. Lettuce is easy to grow in containers, and soon you'll be eating your own homegrown salads. Tomato plants also do well in pots, and a strawberry pot can add curb appeal to a stoop or patio and provides antioxidant-loaded berries. One important tip, if you're only gardening in containers, make sure you use potting soil and not regular garden soil. The potting soil allows air and water to circulate better. And if you are lucky enough to have outdoor space, a raised garden bed allows you to pack a small space full of nutritious fruits and veggies.
We think that many employers will adjust, whatever flexibility they can offer. It is clearly something that job seekers are interested in and employees are interested in. So it's as much about attracting the new workforce as in keeping the current workforce. But having said that, there's not one size fits all. We believe that the hybrid work models are really just a passage to greater flexibility, which is something that employees have been asking for a long time. And during the pandemic, we've been able to illustrate and show that this is something that is workable. But hybrid, we think, is a stage in that evolution because it is quite complex to manage, having different groups being at work or not at work at the same time as they're trying to build a company culture and get their business humming and be very strong past the pandemic.
I'm Larry Madowo in Kilifi, Kenya, and this is CNN.
In our world lead, North Korea's most powerful missile test in almost 5 years. That's what officials are calling the latest launch of what is believed to be an intercontinental ballistic missile. Analysts say the test could be the longest-range missile yet fired by North Korea. CNN's Will Ripley joins us live from Taiwan with more on this. Will, we've seen a recent increase in missile tests by North Korea, but officials say this one could be the most significant. Tell us why.
Some analysts, Pam, have called this a monster missile. We got our first look at it, actually, back in October at North Korea's military parade. This thing is huge. Some analysts believe it could actually be capable of carrying multiple warheads at the same time. Nuclear-tipped warheads, by the way. It is the largest missile in North Korea's arsenal that we know of. It could reach all of North America. In fact, it could travel theoretically up to 15,000 kilometers, which would mean that it could target 95% of the world's population. But yeah, any city in the mainland U.S. potentially in the striking range of this. New York, Washington, Los Angeles. And the North Koreans have tested at a time that there is a lot going on around the world, Pam. And so therefore, this major launch, while it is drawing condemnation, it is not getting the kind of response that you might typically see from a North Korean provocation like this.
Right, because the launch is coming as President Biden and other world leaders are gathering for a series of meetings in Brussels. How are they reacting to this latest provocation from Kim Jong-un?
You know, President Biden met earlier today with the Japanese Prime Minister, who said that this is reckless, unacceptable, and he, of course, has good reason because it landed about, right off the waters of Japan. Japan is inside Japan's exclusive economic zone. It was just off the shoreline of Hokkaido where this thing went down. It flew so high. You're talking about 3,800 miles up and then back down, just to prove that it has this really long distance. It's really frightening for a lot of people, certainly for the South Koreans and their outgoing President Moon Jae-in. He's leaving office in May. He's dedicated his political career to trying to make peace with North Korea. And now, just weeks before he leaves office, they have this major launch. South Korea, for the first time in almost 5 years, Pam, they launched missiles in response to this. So it's a really disturbing trend for those who wanted to see things quieting down on the Korean Peninsula.
It is. Very big deal. Will Ripley in Taiwan, thank you. Coming up, desperate journeys, what the refugee situation looks like across Ukraine's borders 1 month after Putin's invasion.
I'm David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. The IRC is a non-profit organization that helps people whose lives are shattered by conflict and disaster. The emergency in Ukraine is the worst humanitarian crisis that Europe has seen since the Second World War. The IRC is on the ground in Ukraine and in Europe, supporting people on the run from the fighting. But we need your help to help them. Visit rescue.org to donate and learn more about our work.
In Tokyo, and this is CNN.
shot.
Yeah, the shields have gone back up again.
They called for backup and none has arrived.
It's very nice to meet you. I wish you the best.
Forced labor looks different in different countries and different sectors. My name is Jonas Astrup. I'm the Chief Technical Advisor for the ILO Third-Party Monitoring Project in Uzbekistan. And I've been based in Tashkent for the last 4 years. Uzbekistan is the 6th largest producer of cotton in the world, but the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan is the world's largest recruitment effort, with approximately 2 million people picking cotton every year from September to November. And ILO has been monitoring the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan for child labor since 2013 and for child labor and forced labor since 2015 under an agreement with the World Bank. We have witnessed incredible changes during that time. 2 million children out of child labor and 500,000 adults out of forced labor. We have seen wages increased by over 600%. We have seen the number of labor inspectors doubled and perpetrators punished. Forced labor and child labor is now a criminal offense in Uzbekistan. We've seen awareness raising campaigns to make sure that people are aware of their rights, and we have seen a liberalization and a privatization of the agricultural system. There's still work to do in Uzbekistan, but I think it's fair to say that Uzbekistan is a success story in the world of work.
As President Biden wraps up a full day of emergency meetings with allies, tomorrow he'll head to Poland. And Biden revealed part of his plans with reporters today.
Those who have made it across the border, I plan on attempting to see those folks, as well as I hope I'm going to be able to see, I guess I'm not supposed to say where I'm going, am I? But anyway, I hope I get to see a lot of people.
Oops. All jokes aside, Poland has taken most of the 3.6 million refugees who have made it out of Ukraine. CNN's Melissa Bell is just across the border in Poland, where many of these refugees have made their way. And Melissa, Biden says the U.S. will welcome 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. Are there early plans on how that might work?
We do have an idea, Pamela, of how the scheme would work. It is that humanitarian parole that was used for the Afghan refugees fleeing after the U.S. withdrawal in August of last year. So we have an idea of the way the scheme will work. We understand that what's going to happen is that people are going to be given priority. So, for instance, those considered most, first of all, who have family in the United States will be given priority. Then those communities considered most vulnerable, so LGBTQ, journalists, dissidents, those fleeing who have reason to have greatest concern for their safety. But I'd just like to give you an idea of what's happening here at Medica Crossing, where day and night, Pamela, they continue to arrive. Here, the women and children, and it is women and children who arrive day and night. 90% of these refugees are women and children, since the fighting age men have stayed behind. They're given a hot drink, and further down this line will be taken to somewhere where they can be given a night's sleep. And really, it never ceases to amaze us, the amounts of people that continue to cross this border. And again, something really troubling about seeing all these women and these young children crossing on their own. But I think it's important to stress that however generous that American scheme is to try and get these refugees to the United States and give them the possibility of settling there, you're unlikely to see many of them taking that up, simply because these refugees have left their husbands, fathers on the other side of the border. Fighting-age men are not allowed to cross that border. And so what that means is that these women and children are really looking for temporary shelter to get back to a country that they really hope they're going to get back to as soon as they can, Pamela.
Yeah, understandable. They're holding out that hope. And Melissa, Biden mentioned $2 billion in military aid already helping Ukraine, and another $1 billion for humanitarian efforts on the way. Have you seen evidence of exactly what that money pays for?
Well, we know that for a start, for the last few months, the United States, like some of its NATO allies, including the United Kingdom, has already been getting weaponry over to Ukraine. Now, to begin with, those kinds of weapons that were being passed, I'm just going to show you, if I can, through land routes, land arteries, like the road crossing that is here just next to where I'm standing. The kinds of weapons that were being sent were really more for the kind of guerrilla defensive warfare that they were expecting. Now, across those land arteries and the airbase that's not very far from here, what we understand is that they're going to be trying to send the kind of weapons that Ukrainians say they now need, and that is much more the kind of offensive weapons that they're looking for. We know they're running out of munitions. We know that they're going to be wanting more anti-tank weaponry that has proven so efficient so far. Now, across those same arteries, what's been happening is that it is all the humanitarian aid that's been heading as well into Ukraine, and that so much of the country is depending on. The UN managed to get its first truckloads, its first convoy of humanitarian aid up to the besieged town of Sumy just over the weekend. The first time it had done so. It is some 3 million people inside the country that the World Food Programme is now trying to get access to, Pamela.
Melissa Bell, right there on the border, Poland, Ukraine. Thank you. Well, how the past might signal a warning for the present. Moments ago, Russian intelligence officers were indicted for hacking into energy systems around the globe. What it tells us about the current cyber threats to the U.S.
My name is Emmanuel Ahimieho. I'm the project manager of Bandana Kaba Road. We don't need to import anything that we need on the road. They are all locally available materials. So people from the community, they end up becoming suppliers. I think it has brought life back to the communities. And to be able to lead those people to achieve something worthwhile, something that is of value, I feel extremely proud.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
So great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest. I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them? Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move. Very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the theme that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amount of police support coming into this protest. We continue to monitor the government in crisis. This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about. Max Foster, CNN.
At CNN, we see the devastation caused by natural disasters, famine, and war. We also see how the generosity of others can change lives. You and CNN's Impact Your World can help. Reputable charities that are checked out by CNN. See the difference it makes when you give time, share stories, or donate. By just clicking the button, be a part of the solution. Impact Your World.
I'm Becky Anderson, 200 meters above the city of Dubai. This is CNN.
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weeknights.
Protein is great for building muscle, and it benefits your hair and nails too. But while meats are a great source of protein, research suggests that replacing red meat with plant protein could help you live longer. Beans and lentils can be a start. They're rich in plant protein plus fiber, B vitamins, iron, and folate. Most beans are also low in fat. Plant-based sources of protein also include nuts and seeds. Try stocking up on almonds, pistachios, cashews, and walnuts. Whole grains like oats, buckwheat, and brown rice are also good sources of protein. And you might assume that all fruits and vegetables contain less protein than other plant-based foods, but protein accounts for about 1/3 of the calories in Brussels sprouts, broccoli, asparagus, and artichokes.
Breaking news in the tech lead. The Justice Department says 4 Russians have just been indicted, accused of hacking energy companies dating back to 2012. 3 of the 4 Russians are intelligence officers. I want to bring in CNN's Alex Marquardt. And look, Alex, while these reported attempted hacks go back years, it does give us a window into what the Russians are capable of.
It reflects their intent, it reflects what they've done in the past and what they may do in the future. So 3 of these hackers that have been indicted by the Department of Justice are from Russia's FSB, which is their internal security service, which is like our FBI. And they are accused of hacking into hundreds of energy companies around the world, including some here in the United States between 2012 and 2018. The 4th person was someone working for the Russian Ministry of Defense, a research institute. They were helping with a hack in Saudi Arabia. So what this does is really raise the fears of what could happen now, because it's clear that they have targeted critical infrastructure in the past. They know that. And now we're getting these extremely stark warnings from the Biden administration, from the very top, from President Biden himself, who said that the magnitude of Russia's cyber capacity is fairly consequential, and it's coming. The president's saying that Russian cyber attacks are coming. Now, there's a difference when it comes to hacking in terms of espionage, like the SolarWinds hack, where we saw Russians going after government systems to spy. And then there are hacks that are designed to be destructive. And what the FBI has warned is that they've seen what's called scanning, where these hackers scan for vulnerabilities. This warning came out last week that they were scanning at least 5 U.S. energy companies. And what Jen Easterly has said, and she's the head of the U.S. cyber agency, CISA, is that the activity that we have seen so far is not in the espionage category. It's what she says it looks like disruptive and destructive activity that could be coming soon.
Yeah, Jen Easterly, you mentioned I'm going to be doing an exclusive sit-down interview with her tomorrow to talk about the cyber threat and the concern here domestically, and part of that will be airing on this show tomorrow. You mentioned this employee of the Russian Ministry of Defense. It's charged with hacking a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia. This raises concerns because it targets safety systems at power plants. Right.
So that's the last thing you want to hear, is that the safety systems at some of these most vulnerable, most dangerous places could be at risk. So this one Russian employee of the Ministry of Defense helping other hackers get into this petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia. But what they're afraid of is that there were also attempts for a similar facility here in the United States where the security systems were at risk. And it just goes to show that these Russian hackers are going after some of the most vulnerable facilities, not just in the United States, but around the world.
All right, Alex Marquardt, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting.